Remembrance Day has passed, but the conversations it stirs shouldn't fade as quickly as the poppies on our coats. Every November, Canada pauses to honor those who served, and then, almost reflexively, moves on. But this year, something lingers. It isn't nostalgia, it's unease. At a recent meeting of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, testimony from a veteran cut through the usual parliamentary tone. It wasn't at all about policy gaps or budget lines. It was about the quiet suggestion that some veterans, men and women who once risked everything for this country, were being offered medical assistance in dying instead of help. That moment landed differently for me. It collided with everything we say about honor, sacrifice, and care. It also forced a harder question. What happens when a system built to protect life begins to manage death? This isn't an expose in the traditional sense. It's a continuation of what we started in the last episode, The Biology of Thinking, as an attempt to understand how systems drift, how stories evolve, and how human beings make sense of that shift. In the last episode, we explored the biology of belief, how people cling to familiar stories even when the river is clearly running low. Today, that same reflex is shaping a national conversation about choice, suffering, and what we call compassion. MAiD began as a narrow policy meant for those at the very end of life, in unrelenting pain when every medical option had been exhausted. But like many systems that start with moral clarity, its borders have moved. Now, eligibility includes people living with chronic illness, disability, and soon, if expansion proceeds, mental illness alone. Veterans find themselves at the intersection of this shift. Their stories reveal both the cracks in the medical and support systems and the psychological cost of being told that dying might be easier than continuing to ask for help. This episode isn't here to simplify that reality into outrage or absolution. It's here to trace the drift, how a policy born from suffering has grown into something much harder to define. And before we talk about law, medicine, or morality, we're going to start with some context. The roots of MAiD, what it was meant to do, and how it arrived here in the same building where veterans now testify that support feels conditional. Because remembrance isn't just about looking back at war, it's about noticing who's being forgotten in peace. Before we play this testimony, I want to take a minute to talk about what end-of-life care has looked like from the inside. Not from a political or policy lens, but from the clinical side, the kind of moments most people never see. If you didn't already know, I worked as a respiratory therapist for most of my healthcare career. End-of-life care was a significant component of the service we provide in this specialty. During my time working in hospitals, I've been part of a team involved in withdrawing life support from a patient as their family watches. I've been in situations where I had to advocate for a patient's do not resuscitate order while an angry intern screamed in my face that I just needed to do my job. I was devastated the first time I broke a woman's ribs while performing chest compressions at her bedside. Most of my years were spent in providing respiratory home care services. By its nature, home oxygen therapy is part of end-of-life care. Patients often came to us with a palliative diagnosis, meaning they had a life expectancy of less than 90 days. I've sat with people so they didn't have to die alone. I've supported families gathered around their loved one as they take their last breath. That's what compassionate care used to mean to me, doing everything possible to support someone's life and dignity, even when cure was no longer an option. So when I watched this next exchange in the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, it didn't sound like an argument about policy. It sounded like a plea for the kind of care that should already exist. This is Kelsey Sheeran, a Canadian veteran, addressing members of Parliament on October 30th. Her full opening statement runs about 5 minutes, and it deserves to be heard in its entirety.
Hi, MPs. I don't know if you know who I am, but hopefully by the end of this, you won't forget. I know it's easy to forget who we are, so let's see if this one sticks. I served my country at the age of 18. I went to war on behalf of you. A war I now know, and so many of us know, was built on lies. I've buried friends under the same flag hanging in this room, and I've watched the same flag burned outside these walls while you all stand silent calling it freedom when we all know it's terrorism. Here's the truth. Canada doesn't count veteran suicides. You never have. If you don't count us, then you don't have to admit that you failed us. Every single day since Afghanistan, another Canadian veteran dies by suicide. Sometimes two, sometimes more, but you wouldn't know that. And the government of Canada still refuses to track it, publish it, or face it. You hide behind one outdated study from 2016, and that is not enough. It's cowardice. We came home to neglect, bureaucracy, and betrayal. And when veterans reach out for help, this government sends investigators, not healers. We're followed, watched, drugged, and not treated. And when that doesn't work, our system offers us death. I helped break the story when Veterans Affairs began offering MAiD to this lovely lady right here on my show. You said it stopped. Fun fact, it hasn't. You're still offering MAiD, still issuing now NDAs and payouts to shut us up. I know this to be fact because everyone comes to me privately. Over 20 veterans have confirmed been offered MAiD, and I have the proof. And I have proof of more. Offering death to the people you sent to war is moral rot, and this government is full of it. It's betrayal of the highest order. And offering MAiD to people with PTSD is absolutely insane. Research shows 46% of those with PTSD have suicidal thoughts alone, and 19% attempt suicide without even being offered. It's much easier if you just dangle a carrot now, isn't it? See, you don't really need to offer them a needle, a paralytic, or a drug that fills your lungs as you drown to death in your own fluid. You can just, offer them help. Instead, you threaten our benefits if we speak out. I know this because you send PIs to follow me around. And you threaten me in emails, and your own MP and your own Prime Minister has done it. I know this because I also have it in writing. Your silence with us is just bureaucracy and fear. And your Veterans Affairs Minister, a figurehead with zero credibility, blocks veterans online for telling the truth. I also know this because she called for a photo op with me. And when I said no, she began blocking my posts on social media for me calling her out for her hypocritical continued behavior. Because weak leaders like Jill McKnight breed case managers who think they can get away with anything, including to offer us to die. One of the reasons I say this so confidently is because I just did a press conference this morning with MAiD and the expansion you guys are all wanting to roll out. At the same time, which is really fun, Senator Pamela Wallin of Saskatchewan is facilitating a backdoor closed meeting with MPs and senators with Canada's government-funded pro-death cult Dying with Dignity tonight, and you can all join. Lobbying our government to continue to expand death as a solution for the disabled, the homeless, mentally ill, and our veterans. The senator who says she cares about veterans' lives built a political platform off of us, and today she is lobbying in another room to kill us. You don't fix a broken system by euthanizing it, people. And while you fund death and continue to expand in 2027, you deny life-saving treatments. I don't know, psychedelic-assisted therapy, let's take that. A proven, peer-reviewed study and treatment to treat PTSD and depression. Other nations across the globe not only study it, but successfully use it. And Canada continues to bury it in red tape. I know this because I am the only person in Canadian history to legally receive medical psilocybin outside of a clinical trial. Before I was approved, Health Canada offered me electroshock therapy, and I am so sorry they offered that to you, don't you dare. There are other solutions, people. So think about that. This government would rather electrocute somebody who has a traumatic brain injury's brain into absolutely nothing instead of offering me a plant. One of the reasons I'm alive, and only reasons I'm alive, is because of Apex Labs fought through the extensively difficult special access program, not this government. They actually did everything they could to stop me. Every treatment that has helped me has come from outside of Canada, except for Dr. Greg Passy in Vancouver. Paid for by Americans, like Heroic Hearts Project, Defenders of Freedom, and private donors, not this government. While you hand out opioids and vending machines, acting like you're helping, we're begging for actual solutions you refuse to provide. This is what betrayal looks like. You spend $32 billion a year on Indigenous and veterans programs, yet the money never reaches the people who needs it. It dies in committees like this, paperwork, and photo ops. Meanwhile, $500 million go to foreign wars, while the soldiers who fought for this one can't get basic care. So let's be radically honest here, shall we? This room, this hearing, is theater, and every single one of you know it. Because somewhere in this country that used to look and act, smell, talk, and walk like Canada, a veteran won't make it to the morning. A family will lose their loved ones. A child will grow up without a parent, and the void they will leave will never ever be filled. It won't be because they were weak, not because they didn't try every single minute of their life just to keep breathing. It will be because this country that sent them to war and keeps sending kids to war built on lies refuses to bring them all the way home. And it will be your fault. The blood will be on your hands, not mine this time. And I will tell anybody who asks if they want to join, don't. They will leave you to die and step over your body to hand an immigrant your benefits, the ones you fought your whole career for. Veterans aren't asking for pity. We're demanding accountability. Count every death. Publish the data. Stop offering MAiD as a policy. Have we lost our damn minds? Fund the treatments that work. Train actual case managers who speak English and know what we are going through. Stop selling our care to insurance companies like Manulife, because you did that too. You call us heroes when it's convenient, and you call us terrorists when we speak up. That's not leadership, it's shame. We were trained to fight for this country, and now we're forced to fight against it, just to stay alive after serving it. So yes, I live with PTSD, a traumatic brain injury, major depressive disorder, hearing loss, and treatment-resistant depression. But I'm still here. And I will spend the rest of my life exposing this government's failures until no veteran or person in this country sees MAiD as way out ever. And if you ignore us after today, every suicide that follows will belong to you. Because what you refuse to confront, you choose to allow. Fund the real solutions. Stop choosing drugs and death over healing and humanity. We have a saying in the military, we never leave anyone ever behind. It's time this government starts living by that. Thank you.
That's the moment that stopped the conversation. You can feel the frustration, but underneath it is something even harder to ignore. The sense the promise was broken somewhere between service and support. What Kelsey describes isn't only about one department or one government. It's about how a system built to protect life can start treating death as an administrative option. And that's the thread we're pulling in this series of episodes. How MAiD moved from a narrow end-of-life policy to something that now touches people living with trauma, chronic pain, disability, and soon, mental illness alone. Every November, we are reminded to remember, but remembrance isn't the same as awareness. We stand still for 2 minutes of silence, but the noise resumes the moment it ends. And while we speak publicly about honor, veterans are speaking privately about despair, about being offered death instead of help, about waiting months or years for care that never arrives. That disconnect matters. It isn't only a question of policy, it's a question of national identity. What does it mean to remember veterans publicly while so many of them are fighting invisible battles at home? When a government-sanctioned program like MAiD reaches into that space, when death becomes part of the conversation for people still meant to be living, we have to pause and ask whether we still understand what support actually means. This isn't about dismissing choice or condemning MAiD outright. It's about asking if the program has drifted from its purpose and how that drift affects the people who trusted this country most. To answer that, we need to go back to the beginning to understand what MAiD was built to do, how it was framed, and why it has expanded so far beyond its original intent. When you ask most Canadians what medical assistance in dying means, they usually describe a narrow image. Someone at the very end of life, terminally ill, surrounded by family, finally being allowed to go peacefully. That's the cultural picture we've held on to since 2016, when MAiD became law after Carter versus Canada. The court's decision struck down the prohibition on assisted dying, saying it violated the Charter's right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Parliament was told to design a system with strict safeguards, limited to adults facing a grievous and irremediable medical condition, meaning a terminal illness, unbearable suffering, no reasonable hope of recovery. The public was told MAiD would be rare, compassionate, and carefully monitored. 2 doctors must agree. Consent must be informed and voluntary. The person must have a condition causing suffering that can't be relieved under conditions they find acceptable. Everything about it sounded controlled, humane, the final mercy for people already dying. Provinces and territories developed policies to ensure consistency. Practitioners had to follow strict steps: 2 independent assessments, a signed and witnessed request, confirmation of consent right before the procedure. For the public, this looked like the perfect balance between compassion and caution. So when people hear MAiD, most still picture that framework, not realizing how much the definition has expanded. They don't know that terminal illness is no longer required, that the phrase reasonably foreseeable death was removed, that now even someone whose death is not near can qualify if they meet the criteria for suffering and decline. The safeguards remain in the text, but the spirit of the program has shifted. And because most Canadians stopped paying attention after 2016, our shared understanding of MAiD is still stuck at its beginning, while the reality has quietly moved far beyond it. Let's be exact about where the program stands. Health Canada's most recent public report covers the calendar year 2023. It shows that 15,343 people received medical assistance in dying in 2023, which was a 15.8% increase over 2022. That year's total brings the number of MAiD provisions since 2016 to 60,301. In practical terms, MAiD now accounts for roughly 4.7% of all deaths in Canada for 2023. That's a major shift from the earliest years of legislation. In 2016, the first full year after federal legalization, there were about 1,015 MAiD provisions. By 2019, there were roughly 5,631. The growth over time is stark. Another technical fact the public often misses: most 2023 MAiD cases, 95.9%, involved people whose natural death was reasonably foreseeable, what Health Canada calls Track 1. The remaining 4.1% were cases where death was not reasonably foreseeable, Track 2, and these Track 2 numbers have grown since it became permitted. The law itself continues to change. Legislated delays mean that people whose sole underlying condition is a mental illness will not be eligible until March 17th, 2027. That date was set by federal legislation that was passed in February of 2024. That pending change is important because it will again broaden the people who can request MAiD. Around the world, only a handful of countries permit some form of assisted dying. The Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Spain, New Zealand, Colombia, Canada, and then Australia, but it's done within the states. It's not done nationally. In 2023, Canada recorded 15,343 MAiD deaths, representing 4.7% of all the deaths in the country. The Netherlands, which legalized euthanasia more than 20 years ago, reported 9,068 cases in that same year, roughly 5.4% of Dutch deaths. Belgium reported 3,423 cases, or about 3.1% of all deaths. So while the Dutch program remains slightly higher by percentage, Canada has reached a comparable level in less than a decade. That pace of growth is what stands out internationally. Canada moved from just over 1,000 assisted deaths in 2016 to more than 15,000 in 2023, a rise far steeper than in countries where these laws have been in place for decades. What this means for the public story is simple. Most Canadians still picture MAiD as a rare, strictly end-of-life option for people already dying. but the data show a program that has steadily broadened in scope and scale. That's why Kelsey's testimony and similar veteran accounts feel so pressing. Veterans are reporting MAiD entering conversations when they are looking for care and treatment, not when they are at the hospice bedside. That discrepancy is what we're following in the series. One more important transparency point: there's no single publicly available national breakdown from Health Canada that shows how many MAiD provisions involve people who are veterans. Members of Parliament have asked for veteran-specific statistics, and Veterans Affairs Canada has itself produced internal reports examining allegations about inappropriate conversations, but the federal monitoring system does not routinely publish a nationwide tally by veteran status. That gap makes it hard to quantify how often veterans request or receive MAiD from publicly available federal MAiD data. So the bottom line: use is up, scope has broadened, more expansions are legislated to come, and official public data do not currently give us a clear national count of veterans specifically. That combination, expanding access plus uneven transparency, is exactly the problem Kelsey's testimony is pointing us toward. When we talk about MAiD in the abstract, it's easy to lose the human outline. Numbers start to sound clean, policies start to look organized, and the lived reality behind them gets blurred. That's why veterans matter so much to this conversation, because their experiences cut through what's abstract here. Veterans rely entirely on federal systems. Healthcare, benefits, case management, and rehabilitation programs all run through the same chain of command that created MAiD's national framework. They are the one population where every gap in that system becomes visible. When funding stalls, when paperwork backs up, when mental health supports fall short, it lands on their doorstep first. Their medical histories are also some of the most well-documented in the country. Injuries, exposure, psychological trauma, these are not mysteries. They're recorded, verified, and in most cases, directly linked to service. So when veterans describe being offered MAiD instead of treatment, it isn't just anecdotal. It's evidence that a federally managed safety net is rotting from the inside. Unlike many Canadians who might encounter MAiD through provincial healthcare, veterans are already within a federal care structure. That makes their experiences a kind of early warning system. If MAiD is showing up there, where conditions are known, where causation is clear, and where the responsibility of care is explicit, it tells us something larger about the direction of the program itself. This isn't about idealism or accusation, it's pattern recognition. When a system begins to present death as a form of help to the very people it sent into harm's way, that pattern deserves scrutiny. Veteran stories are not the whole story, but they're the first clear signal that MAiD's purpose may be drifting from relief towards something more systemic, and that's why this series starts with them. Every system has a starting point. MAiD didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built, argued, legislated, and then refined. Each step shaped by the same tension we've heard throughout this episode: compassion, capacity, and control. To understand what's happening to veterans now, we have to go back to the beginning, back to where MAiD actually came from, to the problem it was meant to solve, and to the pressures inside palliative care long before the word assisted entered the national vocabulary. We'll revisit the Carter versus Canada decision, trace how the expansions unfolded, and look closely at how and why the system drifted and who's being affected now. The next chapter in the series asks a simple question with complicated answers. What was MAiD meant to be? And when did it become something else? Because we can't understand how veterans ended up here unless we understand what MAiD was meant to be in the first place. If this episode made you think, share it. Subscribe wherever you listen, and let's keep this conversation going, not out of outrage, but out of care for what we choose to call compassion. See you next time.